a blatant, horrific disregard for humanity. Just moments ago, the Attorney General delivering a stinging indictment of the Louisville Metro Police Department. Merrick Garland announcing the results of a 2-year probe that followed the police killing of Breonna Taylor. Investigators say Louisville cops trampled on civil rights in their everyday police work. And the Justice Department finding that Louisville cops violated just about every shred of decency, engaging in outright racist behavior against the black community.
Some officers have demonstrated disrespect for the people they are sworn to protect. Some have videotaped themselves throwing drinks at pedestrians from their cars, insulted people with disabilities, and called black people monkeys, animal, and boy. This conduct is unacceptable. It is heartbreaking.
Begin our coverage of this with CNN's Evan Paris. Evan, a damning indictment. The report, I was flipping through it before we came on the air. It's just example after example of simply stunning and clearly racist behavior. Now what?
Well, now, John, the Justice Department and the government there in Louisville is going to go to court, and they're going to have a judge enforce an agreement whereby the department is going to try to improve the way it does its work, the way it conducts itself with the African American community. And this report really, goes into chapter and verse not only with African Americans, with people who have disabilities, but also, white people who perhaps were drunk, and police using excessive force and having nothing happen to them as a result of this. You can see example after example in this report. It's one of the ugliest, certainly, I've seen in one of these things that has come forward in the last few years. One of the interesting things about this report, though, John, is that you can see, according to the Justice Department, you can see that the Louisville Police Department has been trying to make some changes. They knew that they had a lot of problems, and yet when the killing of Breonna Taylor happens in 2020, it's clear that hardly any of those changes were making a difference. For instance, they had this so-called Viper unit, which was an anti-crime unit that they tried to rename, but essentially was still doing the same thing. They just called it a mobile unit. And what the investigation found was that they were using things like pretextual police stops, which is, anyone who they thought might be just randomly making a wrong turn or something on a road, they would stop them to try to figure out if there were additional crimes. It's something that we've seen around the country that the police departments are trying to get away from, John, because they do result in confrontations that sometimes turn deadly.
Evan, stay with us. Let's also bring into the conversation Ron Johnson. He's the former captain of the Missouri State Highway Patrol. Captain, grateful for your time today. We saw this in Minneapolis after the beating of George Floyd, a consent decree to look at pattern practices by the police department. You're familiar. This happened right there in Ferguson, Missouri, where you were familiar with that. How do they work? And I guess then the question is, do they work? What has to be done? What has to happen in the city, not just with the federal oversight, in the city on the force for this to work?
Well, they come in and there's mandatory training, new pattern and practices that are put in place. And we do see positive results from these consent decrees. They kind of give some standardized guidelines and policies. And that's what we have to see in our country. And I think Congress is looking at some of that, the George Floyd rule, is we have to standardize our expectations, our policies and procedures for policing. And I agree that this is some of the ugliest reporting that I've heard when we look at what's come out of Louisville.
It's ugly is an understatement. I appreciate you being polite about it. But when you flip through this, and again, I haven't been able to read it all. It just came out. But just flipping through the headlines and looking at some of the examples and the citations before I came on the air, it is just time after time after time. You see some of them there using excessive force, conducting searches based on invalid warrants, unlawfully stopping searches, detaining people during traffic stops, unlawfully discriminating against black people. Some of it is the big stuff, like no-knock warrants and invading people's privacies in the black community. Some of it is, I'm going to call the little stuff, and I don't mean to minimize it, but the pervasiveness of it is what jumps out. I was just looking in here. 2 times more traffic citations against black residents than white residents. Nearly 3 times as many searches of the vehicles when it's a black person stopped versus a white person being stopped, which makes this point from the mayor. Listen to Mayor Greenberg saying some people in Louisville get this. Some people probably blind to it.
I know some people are surprised and horrified to hear stories about certain officers operating in ways that are so counter to our values as a community. I also know there are people who are not surprised to hear the findings in this report because they see this report as confirmation of complaints they've made about their own interactions with law enforcement, sometimes for years.
How, Captain Johnson, do you bridge that in the work ahead? The African-American woman is the interim police chief. This is her challenge, first and foremost, on a daily basis right now. But how do you do this, implement the reforms necessary, when black residents of your city, brown residents of your city may have a very different view, incredibly different view of the police department than your white citizens?
Well, I think you have to give those individuals that are being impacted by what is going on, they have to have a voice, they have to have a seat at the table, and they have to be a part of this training process and this cultural change. I think too often the people that are being impacted across this country by this behavior do not have a voice and they're not a part of the solution, and that has to happen for success.
And Evan Perez, to that point, that it has to happen with success, as Captain Johnson smartly points out. Look, there'll be federal oversight now. There'll be an independent broker, it's a judge who oversees all of this. And the city has signed on to it. So everybody today talking in a cooperative tone about the mayor gets it, the chief gets it, they're going to get federal help, and they're going to fix this. What has the practice been in your history of when the bump hits the road? How do you get through the inevitable disagreements about how to proceed?
Right. Well, one of the issues, John, that you see in this thing with these things is that, you know, after a couple of years, sometimes police departments get tired of having, you know, the Justice Department over there looking over their shoulder. And there's a lot of criticism of this practice. Certainly, I think Republican lawmakers on the Hill think that there's too much of this stuff, and that you know, essentially police are being victimized, right, by the Justice Department. But if you look at this report, and if you look at some of the other reports around the country, you know that there's a problem, and there's got to be a way to fix it. Some cities have had success. Los Angeles, for instance, had one of these, and they've improved the way the community perceives the police department. But there's a long way to go in Louisville, and you can see that there's going to be more of these types of pattern or practice investigations announced around the country, John.
Early in this particular process, Evan Perez, Captain Johnson, grateful for your insights on this day. We'll stay on top of this story.
This report really points to widespread abuses. It touches not just on race, but also on gender, on people with disabilities. These probes have happened before. They happen all over the country in police departments, big and small. What stood out to you on this one?
What stands out to me, Abby, is the fact that this is with the consent and agreement of the city of Louisville's police department and mayor. Oftentimes people think of this relationship between the Justice Department and these local police departments as hostile or combative, and that it's the folks from Washington coming and wagging their fingers at a local police department. Here, everyone worked together and came to the report. There's a reason why the Attorney General gave these remarks in Louisville, right? Flanked by leadership of the police department in the city there. And that's really significant here. It's a call for change both at the federal and local level, and it seems that there's broad agreement with leadership there.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, I wonder, Andy, do you think that that is really the only way that these things change if the local officials not just take this kind of feedback from the DOJ, but also are a part of the process of actually fixing these problems?
Well, Abby, it's really essential that you have that sort of collaboration for a number of reasons. First is that oftentimes police departments and police leaders are hamstrung in what they can do and what they can actually change within their own department, particularly where it comes to disciplining officers, because they are restricted by broad collective bargaining agreements that don't allow any, really effective, quick, substantial change. And so often police leadership is pleased to have DOJ come in and basically enforce the law and require that sort of change. And then, as you mentioned, in order for this stuff to really stick, to push cultural change across a law enforcement institution is very hard. It takes a long time. It takes commitment over years and years to really change the mentality. And that you can't force that on people. You have to have them bought into that process.